Right, thank you very much for still staying tuned to KUTV's Rise today. This is Biashara Tuesday. My name is Richard Kenyan, and this is the launch. Now, when we sit on the launch, you know that definitely what we're bringing you is numbers, facts, and of course, interesting conversation on set today. I'm joined with Kimotho, a very popular man in the streets of Yale University, of course, as well as in the streets of Nairobi. He's running a startup, or has run a startup for a really long time. Someone who understands what the ecosystem looks like, and who, of course, has experience both in Kenya, abroad, and all the other places that he's visited. He's a well-traveled man. Welcome to studio.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Right.
It's good to see a familiar face.
It's going down. Right, let's begin from your work at Medbit. You are someone who's run a startup for how many years has it been?
Close to 4 years.
Close to 4 years. Yeah. How is it being a startup founder? Let's start from that.
It's not as glamorous as it looks. Yeah, someone told me it's like an iceberg. You only see 20% and then 80% at the bottom. Yeah, so as Chimano once said, una struggle.
Right. So are you struggling with the startup, or is the ecosystem struggling?
Well, any new idea, especially one that, a phrase that we use in the startup ecosystem is disruptive. So, that is disruptive will always face challenges. It's extra challenging, especially for running a startup, with being bankrolled by money. You have to go out there, look for people to believe in your idea, look for people to invest in your idea, and then look for people to sell your idea to. So the challenges are across every corner, but right. That's why you're in the startup space. And
that is the conversation that I want to have with you today, to help me understand, of course, the perspective of startups in relation to Kenya vis-a-vis the United States. But before we go into that, of course, you are operating in a Kenyan environment. Now, a piece that ran last week says that Kenya's stock of debt zoomed past 7.1 trillion mark in August, and this has winding up at 7.1 trillion, which came from a flat of 6 trillion. That was the debt that Kenya had at the beginning of 2020. Now, this amount of money that has been borrowed throughout the pandemic period, of course, to help the country move forward, do you think that this is a diligent move by the country? And what could be the repercussions of a country such as ours, which is classified as a third world country, to have such a huge debt that is outside?
Well, Richard, I'm glad you asked that, because as Kenyans, we are people who rarely get to see the connection between the debt and how much we owe as a country, and the daily lives that we live. The Kenyan economy is powered by, by and large, the informal sector. 67% of Kenyans operate within the informal sector. So for a lot of these people, they rely on their daily earnings to not just cater for themselves and their families, but to also bankroll their businesses as well. Right. So this amount of debt is worrying, one, because, it's large, it's very large, and we're not seeing the returns, especially as a country, towards making repayments or towards our economy growing. However, it is important to consider that a lot of the cash flow that is, that operates within the economy does not particularly trickle up all the way towards sort of government expenditure, which is mainly taxes, which uses taxes as a form of revenue. Right. So the local person is hurting, yes, especially because of COVID-19, but there is a lot of hope. Kenyans are very entrepreneurial. The entrepreneurial spirit is almost innate in all Kenyans, and somehow, some way, we do find a way to survive.
Right. So now I understand countries are run the same way as startups. Countries need funding. Startups need funding. Countries like Kenya ask for loans to run their to run their country, and then startups, of course, need the same. Now, when you were starting out, how did you look like financially? Did you have to bankroll yourself, or how does it look like in terms of trying to find funding in the Kenyan ecosystem?
Sure. For me, my approach to doing startups, I came at it from a very Kenyan angle, Kenyan perspective. So you must leverage the product that you have to get your revenue. I think that is one very good piece of advice that I wish I received when I was starting. So you must find an audience to sell what you're trying to create, and use that. And then from, we call that organic growth, sort of selling, and then using the profit you generate to sort of amass a much bigger audience until you sort of gain the traction you need to grow big. But funding in itself for startup is very essential. You need to pay yourself. Right. How
do you get to a point where you've raised enough to be able to pay yourself or pay your needs?
Sure. So the first thing you need to make sure you do, especially when you're going into a startup, is you need to sell a complete product. We usually call this the MVP, the minimum viable product. So that is the least or the initial offering that you will sell to a client that they are willing to pay money for. So you need to make sure that you have a product and it works all the way from start to finish.
Right.
And that is actually meeting a need that exists in society.
Right.
A lot of people are selling things that people really don't want to buy.
Okay. So now, Honorable Senator of Nairobi, Johnson Sakaja, has published a bill. It's called the Startup Bill of 2020. What he's trying to say is he's providing, he wants the government to provide a framework for startups to have an easy environment in the country, to get incentives, of course, also to invite investors to come and invest in some of the local startups. The framework that is laid out in the Startup Bill of 2020 says that there are definitions on what a startup should be, what incubators look like, and what are some of those things that the government can do to help, of course, some of these startups in trying to do their business. Now, from your own perspective as a startup founder, do you think that, what have you've gone through, of course, you've gone through the bill, understandably so, because you're a startup founder. What are your thoughts, first of all, of course, with the bill? Is it something that you think will help startups in the country? Of course, bringing it around to how it's done, of course, abroad, especially in the States, somewhere you've been and you've seen the ecosystem. Such initiatives, such as Sakaja's Startup Bill, are they the same abroad? And do you think this bill is something that can help startups?
Sure. I think one thing that everyone involved in the ecosystem is thinking is it's about time that the government actually got involved with the startup ecosystem. Speaking of startups abroad, I think they're usually very good incentives, especially within the United States and other much more sort of developed countries that have like a policy infrastructure to facilitate startups that promotes a sort of very healthy culture. I think the one key thing that when it comes to startups is worrying about the local context. So we're talking about local founders, a lot of the people who within Kenya, really we want to involve them within this ecosystem, but usually for one reason or another, the main one being capital, they aren't involved. So abroad we have things like tax incentive, tax subsidies, we have per diems that are given out, we have grants, conditional grants, unconditional grants, and databases upon databases of investors, of incubation hubs, and so on. So we are sort of benchmarking what other countries are doing and bringing that back home and saying, hey, we noticed that we are called the Silicon Savannah, right? This is Kenya, the sort of biggest startup space within Africa, almost second to Nigeria and South Africa. So it's about time that we really got, pulled up our sleeves and got involved.
Now, in this bill, Senator Sakaja says that for you to define a startup as a Kenyan startup, it has to have at least one local founder within the top ranks of the startup. Now, we have seen a lot of the startups in the country, as you've said, are run by white expatriate founders. I like to call them white expatriate founders because most of them are, right? Do you think that in this regard, when the bill says that for something to be called a startup that is Kenyan, it has to have one founder. Is that something that will help alleviate the situation in terms of who runs the startups in the country, or do you see any other way around it?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand, and really for anyone involved in this space to look at this bill, there are a lot of key points. It's within what we call the first reading that's sort of happening in the Senate. So it was introduced 14th September, and then to the Senate, that is, and then we are having the first reading that was done in October. So it's a very fresh young bill. 2 points to note with this bill is that it requires that startups have a majority stake lying with one co-founder who is Kenyan. Right. And two other points to note is, the requirement that 15% of the startup's budget go to research and development. So we are looking to see how this sort of solution that you are bringing not only is homegrown, but a lot of work is being put to ensure that it's bringing value to the people that whose needs it's addressing. So a lot of focus on the local space. However, it's important to know that this bill is again very fresh, very new. it's not.
So it still has time to develop and bring in.
Yeah, it's probably going to suffer from a few what we call growing pains, especially as it goes through its phases, because it still needs to go to a second reading after public participation. So giving other stakeholders within the space, startup founders such as myself, incubation hubs, and anyone really who has an interest in this space.
Now, this bill being an initiative by a government official or someone who's in the government and trying to solve issues of industry, do you, right, now when a bill like this or like when an initiative like this comes from politicians, how much weight do you feel like shareholders or stakeholders in the tech ecosystem or the startup ecosystem, such as yourself, how much weight do you think your opinion counts towards the passing of the bill as compared to it going through legislation?
Well, Sakaja, who is a very young guy, I think the videos of him circulating around doing gospel music. Yeah. Yes. Sakaja, we hope Sakaja gets it.
Right.
We really, I think at this point, could not hope for a better person to sort of push this bill through. Politicians do politics. It's their work to go in and make these things law. So most definitely, sort of the same way with BBI and, you know, other politicians who are bankrolling it. So you need to think of this from a political perspective. So what we are hoping is that other politicians will again jump on this and give it sort of that strength, the political strength that it needs to be pushed through the Senate and the National Assembly. Right.
Now, you have been in the space that is the startup scene for a long time. Your startup has been all over. You were in South Africa in 2018. In 2019, you were in Vivatech, that is Paris, France. How does it feel, or how does it compare, right? How does it compare between when you meet these startups from all over the world, right? What is the thing that they do different? Because we have been having a discussion for the past 3 weeks on set with several startup founders, with several prize challenge organizations such as Halt Prize, the Red Bull Basement Challenge. Next week, we shall be having the global, the GSEA, right? Now, we look, some of these initiatives by Kenyan founders do not get themselves on such huge platforms. You have been at Vivatech, you've been at Africa Arena, and you've met startups from all over the world. What is the thing that they do different that makes them stay up there? Because when you look at the successful tech companies in the world that are being mentioned are all foreign ones. Nothing locally is making noise out there. What is the thing that we can do that they are not doing?
Yeah, I think what you're looking for, the secret sauce, as it were, would boil down to sort of one word. That is actually two: capital and incentive. So report by Village Capital done in 2016 states that it's just 10 times harder for a local founder to succeed within the startup space, especially in Kenya, than a foreign backed or foreign, founded company, right, or an expatriate, started company. This is primarily because of access to resources. Not for anything else. The product might be okay, but just because they don't get that capital or that push from people who have money, then they really can't deliver sort of last mile to the clients. So that's a big issue that is not really the startup's fault, right? But one thing that I think is missing from the local space is the strategy that you need, because you need to already understand that this is where you're operating in. So the question you should ask yourself as a startup founder, someone involved in the startup space, is how can I best then adapt my strategy or my product to fit into the situation as it already is? So being in touch with reality and what's going on in the ground is extremely important as a local founder for your success.
Right. Yeah. Now, you have been in Yale the whole time that your startup has been running. How is it running a startup from a space that is far away from you, and why couldn't you do this startup in a space that is closer to the Silicon Valley, where I understand there's much more money?
So when you get into this space, it's not really about the money.
Right.
A lot of startups.
I thought it's about the money.
Hopefully, one day.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but when you come into this space, I think there are a few misconceptions that you quickly learn because reality tends to hit hard. Is startup founders are people who work very long hours. You wake up early, sleep late, you pay yourself the last, and you kind of just hope to get by, especially as a local founder. I think the one thing that really I find very attractive about the Kenyan space is the potential that it has. And, when something think there's a Kiswahili phrase that says kizuri chajiuza, kibaya
yes.
chajitembeza.
Right.
Kwa hivyo nimetembea kidogo.
Kubaya.
Yeah, I have seen a few spaces, but like what's really exciting about the Kenyan startup space is we have over 40 million people. You know, really, we have so many incentives. A lot of people being brought into the digital space. Over like 20 million. You know, we have over 40 million. I think more smartphones than there are people within the Kenya ecosystem. One of the fastest internet speeds in the world, and so there's a lot of potential. And it really just makes sense, especially as a Kenyan and someone who lives here. I mean, I'm here with you, aren't I? Yeah, but just being someone involved in the space, it really goes a long way in terms of helping you know where to situate yourself.
Right. Yeah. Now, Sakaja, in his bill, lastly on that, he wants to define what startups are. A startup is this, a startup is this, a startup is this. So for you to be registered as a startup, if this bill passes, it's going to be different as it is being done right now. So right now, when you start a startup, you can call it a startup as long as, until to a point where you can register it as a company. But now this is most likely definitely going to change things, in that now for you to be called a startup, the government has to recognize that you are a startup. Is this going to cause a change in that who decides to be called startup? Is it going to alienate? Is there going to be bias in terms of what exactly is defined as a startup? And at what point, of course, should someone say, now this has now stopped to be a startup? It is time we are done with startup things, we are now a company. What will define that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think one very important thing, especially when you're looking at the definition of a startup, is the novelty of the solution. So what differentiates, like for example, Jumia, which is classified as a startup, with a general shop or a supermarket like Tuskys, Naivas,
which is not a startup.
Yes, so you look at the difference. So again, that's the word disruption. So the novelty of the idea. What are you doing different? So in that sense, then you know that is what differentiates, for example, a startup with a foreign-backed company, or you know, we are looking at FDI, foreign direct investment. So you need that definition really goes a long way in.
So the novelty of your solution is what defines, or the disruption that your solution creates is what defines you as a startup, and not the time limit.
Yeah, definitely. And it doesn't need to be large. Sometimes very small changes can go a long way, especially if you look at cab hailing. They really haven't changed the players who are in the system.
Right.
Or in my case, the startup that we helped co-found, Medbit, which deals with doctors, patients, and you know the infrastructure in between. Really no change in the actors, but the process by which services are accessed, you know, simplifying that process, changing it up, it really goes a long way in terms of defining what is a startup and what is a business, sort of just like any other.
Right.
So it's very important for us going forward to have these definitions. I know the bill includes, you know, this the establishment of a registrar for startups, and hopefully that will make it much easier to sort of sift through and attract the investment from all over. So there are a lot of changes and a lot of benefits to be gained from what is proposed in this startup bill.
Right. So what does Medbit do? To close that up.
At our core, our online pitch is we simplify the healthcare accessing flow for patients, and we just help connect doctors and the people who need the services via technology.
Right. And the technology, of course, via phone and computers.
Computers, yeah.
Right. So you can get those services from where you are.
Yes, yes.
Through your devices. Yeah. Speaking of devices and phones, Kenyans have been fulizering a lot. Watu wamefuliza sana. We have 21 million bro Kenyans strong, and 245 billion in terms of money that has been team ni kubwa sana, I'm being told. 21 million broke Kenyans. 245 billion in terms of the amount of money that has been overdraft. For someone who does not understand, that is overdraft through the mobile wallet, that is M-Pesa. So 245 billion, watu wamefuliza. What is the situation generally from your own point of view when you look at it?
I think the microfinance industry, because you know this is what we are looking at, micro lending, you know, small sort of very pocket-sized, you know, cash sort of transfers and loans. I think it's it's pretty interesting to see how they work, because the history of MFIs and loans came from, and we're looking, as it were, it just came from startups. So we're having companies like Kiva, which started around 4 or 5 years ago, you know, coming in, looking at giving out sort of small loans to these small sort of business projects. And really, it's ballooned to a point where anyone can get a loan.
At any point?
Yes, in the non-traditional sense. You don't need any collateral, you don't need a title deed every time you want to borrow 2,000 from Safari.
A guarantor.
Yeah, so these are unsecured loans, which means the risk therefore increases, and a lot of companies, Branch, Tala, have a very high default rate, really. So there is a very big problem, especially amongst the youth in Kenya, when it comes to money lending and money borrowing.
And these companies, including Safaricom, Tala, and Branch, of course, we'll get into that. And some of them, most of them are startups, and that is why the question is really important, that I get your perspective. Most of them are startups who have someone like apps like Tala and Branch have foreign founders. They are run by foreign-backed money, and they're coming into a space where the youth in the country are unemployed. There's a lot of unemployment in the country. There's a lot of unemployment in the country. These are youth who do not have any means or cannot assure of any means to return these loans. Right now, is this predatory lending? Or is it a good move to allow all this large number of people to access all these loans continuously?
Yeah, my personal opinion is that MFIs are extremely dangerous.
Right.
They're unproven to work because, again, just looking at the reason why they exist, and users of perhaps Tala and Branch might attest to this, is to offer the sort of small push that most people who run SMEs need, actually small enterprises need, to sort of get to where they want to go, to achieve growth. And that's not really happening. We have companies like Okash and Opesa, which are ideally backed by the same parent company, Tensport Limited. You know,
to operate differently.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think if you were to try, the day you do Fuliza,
right.
You know, and you can let me
eventually. Right.
You know, you will notice that the pay bills are the same, that you end up sending back your money.
So it is predatory.
Yeah, so it's very predatory in the sense that these are very small loans that are offered at a very high interest rate, upwards of 20%, with very short lending times, 2 weeks. And there's been a lot of complaints, especially in tabloids, about people being harassed, you know, your contacts being told just how much, you know, pay 4,000 to, or else, you know. So that kind of behavior, it's contradictory, and it's also very much unregulated. You know, we are having the Central Bank of Kenya come up and say, you know, these lending rates are just way too high.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a lot of unregulated behavior, especially within that space.
Right. In a report by Soko Directory, they're saying that the Central Bank of Kenya announced new regulations concerning information submitted to CRBs in what has been hailed by Kenyans as one of the wisest moves from the regulator. Now, in the new directive by CBK, no Kenyan will be blacklisted on the CRB for defaulting loans that are less than 1,000 shillings, and that all those listed already in the CRB for defaulted loans that are below 1,000 shillings should be delisted with immediate effect. The announcement by the CBK came after a number of Kenyans blacklisted on the CRB hit 3.2 million, with more than 500,000 having been blacklisted for defaulting for less than 200 Kenyan shillings. 500,000 people were on the CRB list for less than 200 shillings. And now when you get to the CRB, of course you have to pay a fee that is around 2,000 Kenyan shillings. Now someone has 100 shillings that he owes these apps, and now he has to pay 2,000 shillings for them to be released from the CBK. But if they do not get to be listed there, someone loses their money. Still, in the sense that they were still predatory, some of these startups, such as Tala and Branch, still need their money back. Is it fair that this large group of people will not give the people who gave them money back?
Richard, you can't eat your cake and have it. You can't.
I can eat it, but it's mine. But yes.
Within the context of
Right.
of these micro-lending applications and companies, right? You see, the CRB is a very institutionalized system for reporting defaulters on loans. So if I, for example, was to go to Barclays right now and walk out with like a 5 million shilling loan, because that's just how I roll.
Yes,
but if that was to happen, right, and I default on that loan, then they are within their rights, especially because you signed a sort of contractual agreement or obligation to, one, just list me in the CRB, but also to repossess, you know, their property or their money by any means necessary. However, the concept of unsecured loans based on, for example, in like data collected from your call history or lending habits and your transaction history, especially with mobile wallets, M-Pesa, Airtel Money, is you know, again, it's so unlike you know, what is there within, you know, that is recognized legally, right?
Right.
You can't give an unsecured loan at the
And
same
still
time.
want
Yes,
it back.
you can't eat your cake and have it.
Right, I get it.
So you need to either, again, fix your model or fix the policy. And I'm actually very glad that CBK is not budging on this on this one.
Are you one of them? The 200 shillings.
Richard, we all have our good days.
Let's not get to it.
There's a Kikuyu proverb that says, when the child is full, it tells the mother, let's burn the granary. So
you will not burn the granary. Right. Now, probably to wind up and get back to the conversation of the day that I've been asking people on Twitter and also on SMS and WhatsApp platforms is, how do you feel? Because the youth are the ones who are the most affected by some of this debt, by the loans. And generally, the country has a lot of debt outside. Now, to wind up, what do you feel the country should do, first of all, to, of course, boost the economy as well as reduce this debt, because we are the ones who will suffer, and we are the youth. So the loans that the government owes outside still trickle down back to the economy. It is the youth who will be taxed, who are the majority. And of course, now they still have these loans to pay for. We are coming from a pandemic that has lasted up to now and still goes on. Employment opportunities don't look like they're forthcoming anymore. What would you advise as someone who's been running a startup for 3 years, someone who has been abroad, who has studied in several of the countries? Must be nice. How would you advise the youth to turn around from this situation?
So I'll give you a realistic answer, and then I'll give you what should happen ideally.
Of course.
Yeah. So realistically speaking, you need to adapt. We usually call this, you know, you need to do a worst case scenario. If nothing changes, if the system continues in its current state, then you need to, one, if you're a young person or running a startup, because this advice kind of cuts both ways, is you need to develop solutions or ideas or come up with ways of sustaining yourself that, one, should not require borrowing.
Right.
But secondly, are self-sustaining. So we're looking again at the concept of organic growth. You know, save up 20 shillings a day. If it's 10 shillings a day, eventually you get 100, and then, you know, and so on and so on. So your solution, or, you know, your lifestyle, again, needs to be one within your means. And then, ideally speaking, the idea of public participation, especially where, as far as the startup bill is concerned, and even when it comes to issues such as, you know, loan defaulting on microloans, public participation is key. You need to make sure that you get your voice heard, especially through, you know, key stakeholders that are within the industry. So, you know, go to your local innovation hub. As a startup founder, make noise on Twitter, on Facebook.
Let the people know.
But especially as relates to the startup bill, they do have a website, startupbill.ke. And they're within the public participation phase, so you can go ahead, you know, literally go to the article that you think needs to be amended and hand in your feedback online, and it can take anything between 5 to 10 minutes to do something like that.
Right.
As a young person, talk to your MP, talk to your senator, talk to your ward rep, talk to your MCA, and these are people who are there to represent you. You know, you can also leverage the use of other NGOs, social activists, NGOs, and what have you, to really get out there and make your voice heard. For the government, it's very important to really look at this sector as one that it really, again, makes a lot of money. We have so many young people, and again, a lot of these people, 67% of Kenyans in the informal sector, what that means for the government is that they are untaxed.
Right.
So this is a huge sort of honeypot that the government can, again, go in and try and, again, leverage policy to obtain benefits in the form of tax revenues, in the form of levies and other fees.
Right.
So it's a win-win for everyone, really.
Yes. Thank you very much for having this conversation with me. Sadly enough, time will not allow us. We could talk endlessly. There's a lot of information, of course, to get from your perspective, and good stuff that you are doing. And good luck with studies at Yale.
Yeah. Hi, Mom. How are you?
Of course, I want you to do that here, even as we close up. This is your camera. You can tell people your last remarks and also, your last thoughts on the startups and of course the environment, the bill, and of course say hi to Mom.
Okay. Ningependa kutuma salam. Yeah. As far as startups go, I think just to encourage anyone out there with an idea, really go ahead, get in there, go out and do it. The market is ripe. But just really take your time and go for it. Again, I think shout out to other people who have really influenced me and who held my hand as we walked. My parents, my siblings, you, and my Medbit colleagues, and other people involved in the ecosystem as well. And happy Mashujaa Day to you all.
Happy Mashujaa Day to you. Right, so we are going to do a technology segment.
Sure.
What we've been showing is on reality, and we are going to be showing reality. I think you are someone who understands this. I understand you have also been engaging with VR for quite some time. Right, so we are going to play that after a very, very short break right here on Biashara Tuesday on KUTV.